Hey guys, it's Ken McElroy here, and as you guys know, we all are trolling the internet, trolling YouTube, trying to find good content, and one of the guys that I watch a lot is Meet Kevin, and so we reached out, and here he is. Hey, Kev.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. I think that's so awesome.
Well, I love like you're going down your lane, I'm going down my lane, and we're trying to educate folks. So why not get on? And I mean, I love the conversations we've had offline. Just we went all over the place, and so I think this is going to be fun. I appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. It's going to be great. And I think there's so much that everybody can learn by sort of merging perspectives. So it'll be super fun.
For sure, for sure. So you want to start? Where would you like to start?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing that's on everybody's mind is what's going to happen to this real estate market, and where do we go from here? What do we do with our money? I think we're all in that same boat. All of us want to make money. We don't want to lose money. So where do we go from here? What do you think?
It's a tough question. We get that all the time. We're doing obviously raises for big commercial projects, and we're kind of in that arena. And I actually just had a long conversation this morning with my good friend Mark Victor Hansen, Chicken Soup of the Soul, about this exact issue. He's like, what do I do? It is a common theme, and I think from my standpoint, I think people have to look at the migration patterns, where people are leaving and where they're going, because it's creating depressions in some areas and certainly bubbles in others. And a lot of times when people are looking at real estate, they look at it nationally or maybe at a city, and as you know, it just doesn't act like that. It's very temperamental. It can be very different even on one side of the town to another, right?
Oh my gosh, 100%. And so to clarify, you started with by mentioning you're working on these bigger commercial projects. I know usually when we think of residential, it's like 1 to 4, but you're doing mostly like residential commercial, right?
Yeah. So we're really multifamily. The project we just put out was a 300 unit ground up construction deal. $50 million with a $20 million raise. And so, that's all, obviously all syndicated. That's a normal deal for us. We used to do a lot of value adds, but those projects are harder to find because the capitalization rates are getting pushed down. And, we've had this crazy rent growth, which is, we've got this affordability issue going on right now. So we're building at the moment, but we do have self-storage, we have office, we have land development, and of course we've done condo projects and residential in the past. But right now we're just focusing on what I would consider to be these larger apartment blocks. You would see with gated entries, pools, fitness centers, all that kind of stuff. That's the stuff that we're doing at the moment.
And that's interesting. So you're actually seeing so much competition in the stuff that's already built that you're getting into building these larger multifamily developments yourself because you're not seeing the opportunities to actually buy them and then add value.
Yeah, so we did do that in 08, 9, 10. We had an incredible run. At that point, Kevin, there was no value add. The banks were just banks had deals. And so we were buying them from the banks. We bought lots of properties from different lending institutions, and they would write down their loans, and it would hurt the bank's shareholders. But that's how we originally bought, and then we were just stabilizing those, and then the value add market came, and then we value added those. So that was like a second bite of the apple, on stuff that we'd already owned. But then what happens is the cap rates, the prices, people are stretching for deals because there's so much money. And so we turn to ground up construction because we actually can build for less than we buy.
That's incredible. So in other words, there's so much competition in syndications and funds these days, and so many people trying to put money into real estate that the cap rates are going way down because people are just overpaying to get into deals. So you thought, all right, well, let's find a different way to make money here.
100% right. Yeah. So the equity is driving the real estate market, and right now interest rates and equity are driving the real estate market. So you still have to, at the end of the day, whether it's your money or my money or somebody else's money, the deal still has to make sense. And a lot of people are just, kind of overlook that, and they're oddly enough, because of fees a lot of times.
Oh, tell me about that. So what's an example of a deal that makes sense, and how do fees make a deal not make sense? And then I think we'll probably get into like bubbles and depressions.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I'll just give you a great example. We went to a limited partner and a general partner conference where literally these big groups, these pensions, these insurance companies were there. And their entire job is to, obviously like a big insurance company is sitting on a bunch of cash and they're trying to find local guys like me, like you, to put their money around. And so we're sitting around this conference and the guys are like, they're middlemen. They essentially have all this cash and they're trying to find guys like me. And they're literally, they get paid to place the money. If the money's sitting, as you know, we're going to talk about inflation in a little bit. If their money's sitting in a bank or in some kind of low interest bearing account, they want to put it to work. And so there's pressure, whether you raise a fund, $100 million fund or $1 billion or whatever, you have pressure to put that out into the marketplace. And so that pressure, the amount of syndicators, the amount of equity that's hitting the market at the moment is actually putting pressure, especially now with people are afraid of the stock market. So even more is coming out. And so that's actually driving real estate values at the moment. So it's interesting.
So you're actually seeing record inflows because the stock market has ran up so much, where people are thinking, well, do I want to be in like Carnival Cruise Lines or an overpriced Tesla? Or would I rather just buy real estate now, huh?
Yeah. And as you know, there's some stocks are great deals. But generally, the people are afraid, I think, of the stock market bubble. They're also afraid of the real estate bubble, and they're afraid of the bond market bubble. So there's all these, what I would consider bubbles, and they're trying to figure out what to do with their money, and so that's putting pressure on all kinds of things.
Oh my gosh, I mean, we could just look at Bitcoin, which I'm sure we'll touch on later as well. Yeah. So, okay, that's really interesting. So you're seeing so much competition because there's so much more money and wealth available that people are driving prices up in this multifamily space substantially. But, how has COVID impacted these multifamily projects? I mean, aren't people moving away from these larger buildings into like the single families?
So it's interesting. What we found is that a lot of people are staying put. So in other words, when they're kind of displaced, I think that if they had jobs somewhere or they can't afford, then they obviously are moving. And I think you could look at the Pew Institute, the PEW Institute, and you'll see that like over 50% of 19 to 29-year-olds actually moved home. So there's millions of people that actually have moved home. So there's definitely some displacement going on, and I think there's kind of a chase to affordability. But generally, if let's say if some of our residents are living in an area and they're working, and they're probably staying put. But even if they're furloughed and they might continue to work in that area, they're staying put. But if their employers have, let's say shut down or downsize or whatever, and they're facing that, then they're obviously moving around and figuring that out based, on damage control, really.
And where are you seeing people heading to and away from? Because I think you've got projects throughout the country. I think you mentioned Oklahoma, and you've got projects in Texas. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is a big outflow of people from cities. Anything that's rural or urban, they're moving to more rural areas. And I think this telework, telecommute thing is a real thing, and it's here to stay. So that's another issue. They usually, obviously, they didn't want long commutes, so they would live reasonably close to where they work. But now they're like, hey, if we can move to another state, we can move to another country, and for that matter, and if we can fly in and out, and based on the corporate meetings at the time. So there's a lot of migration happening, and it's creating real bubbles in a lot of these smaller rural markets. I'm hearing crazy stuff in Montana, in Idaho, in Oregon. These bubbles are all over.
And is that just because, and I do want to quickly mention it, it's so funny you mentioned other countries. I just read that Greece is offering people 50% off their tax bill if they move from another country to Greece for the next 7 years. You get 50% off.
Oh my gosh. Well, and tax is a big reason. I mean, as you know, you're in California, that Prop 13, and, there's lots of taxes coming down the line. And by the way, California is not unique. It's happening everywhere. And I'm from the Seattle area. They have the same kind of issues. And so that's a real thing. I think people are going to chase affordability. They're going to, they're taking a look at their mortgage payment, their rent payment, maybe the utilities or certainly property taxes are a big deal. And they're going to kind of reevaluate where they want to be. And so there's the jury's still out on where they're all going to go and areas that where they're going to end up.
So that's really interesting. So what you're thinking is people are moving. I mean, out of the cities makes sense, but to even like not just the suburbs, you're thinking like rural areas. You're seeing it go to like Idaho and Montana. Tell me about that. So you think those are like getting overly fat potentially?
Well, so I own a home in Idaho, and it's actually right near Montana. So I actually just spent 5 months in that area. Just got back to Arizona 2 weeks ago, and so I'm speaking from personal experience as I was going around anywhere. If you look at Boise, for example, which is not on a lot of people's radar, it's one of the fastest growing cities right now in the country. And I was in an area called Coeur d'Alene, but we're seeing it in all kinds of areas up in that Pacific Northwest as an example. Because the truth is, Kevin, you can buy an incredible home in some of these areas for $200,000-300,000.
Yep. Out in California, that gets you like a little studio apartment in many places.
Right.
It's incredible the value you could get elsewhere.
Right. So we're seeing that, but on the rental side, what I always say about COVID to people, as I said, it kind of just accelerated what was already in motion. So I have a lot of friends in the mall space and the retail space and the office space, obviously the multifamily space. And it's essentially just took all those retailers and just immediately pushed everything that was going to happen probably over the next 10 years, within just a few month period. And, so my retail guys, they're collecting less than 50% of their rents. The hotels are less than 50% occupied. And so those are potential defaults and opportunities that we're going to see, I think, coming up. But from a multifamily standpoint, you can imagine the supply has stopped, or I shouldn't say stopped, it's slowed way down because lenders are, lenders are sitting back going, what are the property values going to be? And that's how they base their loans. And so all that slowed way down, and people are usually, there is some issue obviously in the single family market, as with the forbearance, and we don't know where all that's going to go. But some of those people will be displaced down into rental housing, and just like happened in 2008, that's actually what gave us this big push. Is people fell out of single-family housing in 2008, 2009, 2010 during that crash, and actually put all this pressure on the multifamily space and the rental space. So back when Bush became president, he was like, we want people to own their own homes. And that's actually what created the bubble during the Obama administration. That's actually what created it to pop. And then so when that popped, they defaulted into rentals, and the rental, the guys that were in the rental business, we couldn't keep up. And so we needed over 300,000 units delivered just to 2030. So we were already behind the demand curve, just on the supply side, just to take care of that, because nothing really had been built from about 2007, 2008 to about 2015, 16, because the economy was not in great shape. So that became a supply issue when all this demand was hitting at the same time, which created this rental run that we just experienced.
That's interesting. So because of tight lending and these maybe more challenging appraisals and sort of this whole puzzle piece shifting around, you see this potential pressure on multifamily again because we're not filling that 300K unit demand per year that we need.
Right.
So existing rents have nowhere to go except for up, is what you're thinking.
Right. And it's going to be market to market. So obviously if you own something in the urban downtown core, let's say in Seattle, that's going to be a very different scenario, or maybe San Francisco or New York. But as you're going to start to see as people move around, it just creates bubbles. It's just math. If people move somewhere and there's not enough housing and everyone's full, then prices go up, and rents go up.
Now, do you think that that's going to be how do we differentiate people moving to, let's say, Idaho, Montana, and that being a bubble versus just natural price appreciation because now population has gone up?
Sure. Well, what balances it out, my experience has been, developers come in and add supply. And so a healthy, you've been in markets where a house sells, in 24 hours. Okay, that's not necessarily healthy. Same thing with rentals. I've been in rental markets where we have waiting lists, and that's not necessarily healthy either. And so I think a good balance of health is something that, there's a little resistance, but not too much. And so what happens is if something's on the market a long time, whether it's a rental or a single family house, the price goes down, period. Rent goes down through some kind of a concession. The house price goes down, because it's on the market a long time. It's the same thing on the other side. So, I think you're going to see temporary bubbles, and what can throw it off really quickly, especially in small markets, is if somebody comes in and just builds something and then that displaces the market temporarily. And so that's, I think, is what you're going to see next.
Interesting. Okay, so this potentially a surge in building coming to the areas where people have been traveling to. So, for example, moving to. We have a lot of people going from California to Vegas, so maybe there might be a sort of renewed building boom there that'll then soften existing prices. Is that sort of what you're thinking?
Exactly. So I used to live in Vegas, and that's happened before. We saw that exact thing. People were moving from California because of taxes or whatever it might have been. I think water shortages or whatever the flavor of the moment is. And so Vegas, when I lived there, would boom and bust based on California, what was happening there. And that's exactly happening now. It's also happening in Phoenix, is where I am now. We love Californians because, they could stroke a check for a house pretty easily, based on where they've come from. And so, we're expecting in Phoenix and in Las Vegas massive demand issues because, and supply is going to be, it is what it is. And so you have these people coming in and a supply issue. And I think that you're going to see potentially areas that are going to really grow because Vegas is affordable. Phoenix is affordable.
Yeah, and I think if you mentioned it earlier, I thought it was a great quote. I wrote it down. You said people are chasing affordability, and it makes sense with like you said, telework is here to stay. It 100% makes sense. So what does that mean in your opinion, for people who are living in Vegas? Should they buy more? Should people in California sell? How should people position themselves as investors if they're in these different areas, do you think?
Well, for sure. I always tell people, don't try to be a pioneer. Don't try to predict the market. Make sure. I think it's too early to tell right now. But if I always go right straight to cash flow. So if you could buy a place in Vegas, let's say for $200,000 and the rents are $1,500, it's going to work.
Right.
And that is the case right now. But that $200,000 might be $300,000 in a year or two, and then the rents might be at $1,600, maybe $1,700. They're not going to grow at the same rate. So you have to look at each individual submarket and make the decisions there on a local basis. But I definitely think people are moving to affordability, and I think that that's going to create some price run in some areas and price decline in others.
How do you think the eviction crisis is going to affect all of this?
It's a thing, man. I mean, we've got 10,000 apartments, and we really thought that we were going to have a massive issue on collection in March and April, and that didn't happen. We've collected anywhere in the mid to high 90s every single month. The stimulus helped a lot. That I'm not going to lie, we got some PPP and some of that government stimulus money. I'm concerned about our residents, obviously, but we're still collecting pretty well. But there's a number of evictions pending. I think that the last I read was because the CDC order is over at the end of the year. And I read that there's somewhere around 6+ million that potentially could be facing eviction in January. And obviously that's not good for anyone, displacement.
I want to run this by you. I had this idea the other day. I was just trying to make sense of potentially what could happen if there was no rental assistance bailout, so to speak, which I think there's a chance there might be. We'll see how McConnell and Pelosi and Biden get along. One of the things that I was thinking could potentially happen is that we might see this potential, obviously we went into the year, then we had this kind of surge in prices as interest rates fell. Potentially then, at the beginning of 2021, if we see an eviction crisis here in January, I was wondering if it might be possible that we see sort of this temporary dip that lasts maybe 3 to 6 months with all this inventory that comes on until we kind of go back to this more steady, slow, more regulated appreciation until, of course, interest rates go up, which then you might be having another problem. Well, what do you think?
It's absolutely a possibility. In 2008, when let's say 2004, 5, 6, 7, and 8, rolling up to there, because we were super active in this. What we were seeing is the opposite. So in other words, we were having occupancy issues because everybody could buy a house. And so
Dead
now
people could buy a house.
Yeah, right. You could fog a mirror and buy a house. It was crazy, what was happening at that time. So, now I think you're right. I think we're going to have, millions and millions of people are going to be displaced. And I think that they're going to figure out, they always figure it out. They roommate up, they move in with their parents if they can, they move to something cheaper, and obviously the job and all that kind of stuff has a massive piece of that. But there's no question that there's going to be a tremendous amount of people displaced next year. How deep it is, how long it is, I think a lot of it is going to have to do with the government and the programs. They already stepped in and gave them the $1,200 and the unemployment. That could happen again. Back during the early days, when we had the economy also dip, that's when Section 8 and Social Security and all that stuff was developed. So my guess would be, hopefully, that these politicians are going to, get their stuff together and figure out a way to get money to these folks, because they're telling them to stay home. And then, and they, they're having affordability issues. Before we got here, savings rate was low. People were paycheck to paycheck largely. And that hasn't changed. And so but they're survivors. Most people are survivors, and they do need help. I'm very concerned. I do think we're going to have inventory issues next year, both on the mortgage, the forbearance piece, a piece of that. But I also think
You think inventory is going up?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I do think we're going to have inventory going up next year as a result of that, and I do think we're going to have inventory going up as a result of the renter piece. Because the reality of it, Kevin, is that when somebody can't pay rent, then the landlord can't pay rent. I can't pay the mortgage, and so there's a ripple effect. Obviously, if somebody's not paying me their rent, then I can't pay the lender, and so there's defaults on two ends. And so I think we're going to see that next year.
How much of the loan hardships do you think are going to translate to like, let's say, foreclosures, or where does it stop? Because we've got tenants stop paying, like you said, then landlords can't pay, but then landlords have this forbearance that they can take for, a year. So do we have to wait until that forbearance ends to start seeing this, or are we going to see landlords just dump properties because they're sick of tenants and toilets?
Yeah. Well, I love that term that you use. First of all, the forbearance, as is more on the government loan programs. And so that's a small piece of the actual loans. So you have to, the big picture is if you're individual special servicer on a loan, and it's not a government loan, then you're kind of dealing with that person directly.
Collecting.
Yeah, right. And so, a lot of times those are packaged and sold off, as you know, and there is an end user, like these, my buddies that own hotels or they own retail, for example, those are, public or private pensions. Those are people, that's real people's money that they've been putting in their pensions. If those default, it rolls all the way to the pension. It actually hurts the person that put the money in the pension, and that's not good. So, and of course, somebody takes that building back, and then they sell it for a discount, and on and on and on. And so you have that, but I think hopefully the government comes up with some kind of program, because they've definitely handled it, but somebody is not getting paid. Somebody somewhere is not getting paid. And so you got to follow it all the way to the end. If I loan, money to somebody and they don't pay me, it hurts me somehow. I'm reliant on them for stuff that I need to pay. And so it's a big, ripple effect all the way through. So I think that anything that's government protected is probably going to be in a little bit better shape than anything that's private. And, but at the end of the day, I think that people are going to have to move through this. I think you're going to see defaults and foreclosures happen next year all over the place. The big ones are going to be in the commercial space, which is really crystal clear. Amazon's just hurt a lot of retailers, a lot of malls, and we're not traveling anywhere soon. So the hotels, the retail, and the malls are in big trouble.
Wow. So definitely the writing is on the wall, so to speak, for the malls and the hotel industries and maybe the strip malls around town. So how does that affect, because you also mentioned you're in storage units, how does that affect storage units?
Yeah, so right now storage is actually doing pretty well. Industrial's doing really well. That last mile storage, Amazon as an example, you want something, you want it this afternoon, right? Well, they have figured out a way to rent industrial space. So industrial space is on fire. It was before this, and self-storage, same kind of thing. Anybody that's downsizing in any way is moving stuff to storage. And so I'm really bullish on storage. I'm bullish on multifamily. I'm bullish on industrial, not so much on the retail, the office. And I think office is coming. Right now, obviously you got 10 or 15 or 20,000 square foot in an office building, and you're on these long leases. When those leases expire, most companies are not going to renew, because they're rethinking, first of all, that space. They're rethinking their profitability. They're rethinking, how they're going to run their company. And they're more than likely, because we own office buildings, they're already saying, we have 10,000 feet. We want 3. We want 2,500. We want 2. And so, the office buildings, I think, are going to have a bit of a lag, and we're going to see that over a period of time, and that'll be fully transparent in probably 3 to 5 years. You'll see that, and the higher rents and all that stuff that's all going to change.
So this is fascinating. So fast death will be hotels, malls, in many cases the strip malls. Slow death, you actually think is going to be that office sector, that 3 to 5 years. So in other words, if you're trying to pick up dying opportunities and go bottom fishing, you want to start with probably hotels and get some real fat discounts there. But office, you might actually have to wait another 3 to 5 years before you could actually see some of those basement prices there, huh?
Yeah, and I think even then you got to be careful, because we don't know where this is all heading, and so you can buy something, in 3 to 5 years, and the leasing market still might not be there, and rents still might be going down. Whereas a hotel is, because it's nightly, generally it is what it is. It's already in trouble. There's a really good YouTube video that I watched with the CEO of Starwood, and he said a third of the hotels in New York are going to go down, and that was his estimate a couple of months ago. And this is a guy that obviously knows hotels, and so
Starwood. Yeah.
I think It's going to be very, very interesting. And what'll happen is they need to make their way, obviously an operator is going to hold on tight, whether they own a self-storage or they own a home or they own a hotel or they own a multifamily, they're going to hold on tight and do everything that they can to hold that thing. And they're going to slowly go into default. That's kind of how it happens. And then that eventually gets taken over by the bank. And honestly, at that point, Kevin, that's the time to negotiate is with the bank. I use the term, you don't want to catch a falling knife. Let it go where it needs to go. There's all kinds of emotional issues around losing investor money and defaulting on your loans and your credit and all that kind of stuff. We need to let that happen. It's horrible. There's real people losing money. But the best time to do it is when it hits a bank's balance sheet. Now that's toxic. That's toxic real estate that the bank has because they lent on it. Now they have it back. So they're very motivated to move that off of their balance sheet with an operator that knows what they're doing. And that's how we bought a bunch of stuff in 2008, 9, and 10 is, they were discounting their loans. And then they're not financeable if you think about it. Like we bought a property in San Antonio. The loan was $26 million, and they wrote down the loan to 20, and then they had to finance it because it's 50% vacant.
Wow, jeez, yeah.
Yeah, and then they're like, okay, we'll finance it. There's nobody else is going to finance a 50% vacant deal. So now they're picking an operator that can turn that around, fix it, and create value. And 3 years later, we had grown, that property was worth a little over $40 million. And then we went back, we took Bank of America out, put a new lender in, and it's all a win-win. They did take a $6 million discount on their loan, which hit their shareholders. But we got a really nice asset that we fixed up and helped the neighborhood and all that stuff. That's how you want to buy real estate, and that's how you create value for yourself and for your investors.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I love that about once the bank hits it, it's toxic. It's almost like short sales in the single family space. What's the broker price opinion? Oh, it's $400K? No problem. We'll sell it for $300. Just get it off the books.
Right. Yeah.
So okay, you're bullish on storage, last mile. I think with industrial, you're talking about like warehousing, right?
Yes.
Okay, and multifamily. So, do you believe? Like, how do you think this potential eviction crisis and these foreclosures, which will happen now in hotels and malls, how is that going to carry over to say that residential market, that even that single to multifamily?
Oh, I think the whole thing's going to be, a massive garage sale.
Wow. Okay.
I really do. We're going to see some multifamily go down. I mean, like think about it. I've been bidding on. Our acquisition guys have been trying to buy stuff, and for the last couple of years, it's so competitive because of the money I mentioned earlier. And so there's people stretching for deals. And the way you buy deals, the way you raise money is you say, listen, rents are $1,200. We think we can grow them to $1,500 by putting this kind of money into a project. So anything that was value add deals, value add right now for apartments is off the table because people are, they're having a tough time paying rent. We have these eviction issues. So anybody who did that in the last year or two, those are definitely candidates that potentially you could buy, reposition, et cetera.
So you're thinking anyone who bought multifamily in the last couple years thinking they were going to put in a pool and raise rents $300 a door, now they're can't. They might have to sell out.
Yes, especially if they have occupancy issues. So a lot of it depends on the makeup of the people that are living there. So obviously, if you've got, let's say, a heavy restaurant, sector. Let's say you got a lot of people that are service workers and they're out of work at the moment. Obviously, they're going to have some issues around paying rent because their places aren't open, and so it's all going to be very, very different. Hospitality, anything based around hospitality, tourism, those are areas that we're obviously going to see. We already are seeing depressed depressions, and you're going to have those kinds of things. So it depends on the business plan itself. Where they said they were going to be able to do one thing and they're not delivering. They oftentimes stretched on the price, stretched on the loan. They even sometimes have above market interest rates and even bridge loans that are higher priced debt. And so they're going to be fighting all of those things because their whole goal is to grow rent, grow revenue, grow income. And that's not exactly happening right now. We're not seeing rent growth right now. Right. And so if their philosophy was based on rent growth, potentially they're going to be in a big trouble.
That's interesting. So now, if you went into, let's go with Orlando, Florida. Now, Kissimmee, the NASA and Disney and all that. You go to that area. Do you wait for the banks to have these toxic assets, or are you starting to knock on the door now?
Both. Yeah. So we do both. Yeah. So absolutely. There are definitely times, sometimes you can go in and restructure a deal with a partnership and water down the general partnership or maybe have them take a secondary position. All that's going to happen. And so the last thing somebody that owns a property wants to do is go through that default process. And each person is very different, Kevin. I mean, we have guys that they're like, I'm going down with the ship. I'm never discounting. You have that, and then you have guys that'll sit down and go, you know what? I see the writing on the wall over the next year or two. Let's cut a deal. We can maybe salvage our investor, our investment, or our deal, or whatever, and maybe they need new cash. So all over the map on that. Once it gets to the bank, it's just math. The banks just want them off their balance sheet because it's REO or real estate owned, toxic, and it affects their ability to track money into land and their stock performance.
So what would your recommendation be to, let's say, the individual investor, the person who's maybe about to buy their first place, or maybe they just sold their first place, thinking maybe there's going to be that garage sale opportunity coming up. How does somebody on that smaller scale get in now? What do they plan for going forward? Somebody with $50K in the bank ready to go.
Well, I still think there's massive opportunities. We have big disruptions. So if I had 50 grand in the bank, I would look, as Wayne Gretzky said, how are you such a great hockey player? He said, I always skated to where I thought the puck was going. And so if people can do that, if they can try to take a look at what's going to happen here, and how can I put because a $50,000 down payment buys you a $200,000+ home, let's say, and so if you just take a look at the economics, what's the rent in the area, what's my interest rates are amazing right now. People are crazy not to be borrowing right now, especially with inflation coming, which I really believe is coming. If you can we just locked a refinance, 2.71% fixed, 7 years interest only. And it was a cash out refinance. So think about that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, and the Fed's now loosened their 2% target. So we're basically borrowing money for almost free. We're basically riding inflation using OPM or other people's money by borrowing at that rate. So borrowing is such a good time right now. If it's covered by a renter or covered, by some kind of business or something, obviously, and that's where the magic is. On the commercial side, the key is the tenant. Is it a fast food chain, that's, maybe not doing so well, or is it a tech company that's doing really well, or a healthcare company that's doing really well? So, those are the kinds of things that you need to look for in a commercial tenant. On the multifamily, same thing. Is this an area that's contracting, or is it an area that's expanding? And so it's pretty common sense. And so if you can figure that out and see where people are going, then you can, be in front of it. And, I do believe that you're going to do very well. The key is obviously, can you get that mortgage, and can you get your expenses covered? That's it. And so people, what they do is they buy cheap out in the middle of nowhere, and then they can't figure out why they can't get a tenant. Well, that's not what we're talking about here. It happens all the time.
Yes, it does. I was actually I wrote that down. It's okay. I'll let you keep going. You nailed it.
Yeah, it happens all the time. People are, I don't blame them. They're like, okay, we could buy for 300 grand, right in front of this, military base or, stadium or, shopping district or university or whatever you call it, some place that has a lot of people going and coming. Or they can go to the edge of town and save 50 grand and, and say, well, I can't imagine why people don't want to drive, 5 to 10 miles away when, rents are $100 less only, so, you just have to look at the economics of that and figure out, we always try to buy, we always say, is it Main and Main, and everybody knows what Main and Main means. So how far is it from Main and Main? Now they have this new thing in commercial real estate. It's called walkability. There's a walkability score. Those are big things. People like conveniences. They like things that they can be near, not necessarily their employer anymore. We're starting to see, obviously, but they like stuff, and even though we've got these social gathering issues right now, I do think that's going to change over time, and that'll all kind of fall back. Not everyone's going to want to live, on 10 acres in Montana, and hunt their own food, So
Oh, that's brilliant. So, and I see this a lot too. People come into a new city and they say, or they were renting there and they say, I want to buy. The first thing they do is they go on Zillow and they sort by cheapest and they get everything on the fringes.
Yeah.
So your recommendation is focus on that more central location, something that does have that better walkability score, something that is going to be more future-proof.
Yes. Yeah. Because again, it's not about, as you know, you make the money when you buy, but that if it is for cash flow or, you want to be where people want to be at the end of the day, that's what you want. And so whether it's a grocery store or some kind of small business or an employer, that's what drives, real estate exists for people. And that's how you have to look at it. Where are the people and how well can I buy there? And that's really how you look at it. And if maybe it is on the fringe, and maybe things are growing to the fringe. I got lots of guys that are buying multifamily parks just outside of, areas that are really expanding and growing. And so not a bad strategy, but it might be 3, 4, 5, even 10 years, perhaps, maybe never that, the growth makes it to there. But at least it's covered with, their mobile homes and their manufactured housing. It's a covered land play. And so there's kinds of things that you can do very well to try to, and you don't have to do it all over the country. I always tell people, do it where you are, be smart. And an area, if you went to high school and junior high and you moved around an area and, there's a military base here and there's a kind of a bad area here. Back in the day, my parents used to call it the other side of the tracks. A lot of investors don't know that. Well, you know that. So those are the kinds of things that can, they're small nuances, but they make big, big differences in how you invest your money.
Wow, yeah, I hear that a lot, and it's a question I get so much is people are always wondering, hey, I live in California or I live in a pricey area. Where should I go buy? I usually like to follow something very similar. I call it the 30-minute rule. If you're within 30 minutes of it, odds are if it's going to be safe to do a Craigslist transaction there at 9 p.m. at night.
Right. Yeah.
What do you recommend then for people who say but I know my area really well, but it just seems expensive. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, and it might be. They might have a valid point. And I always say, I hear this a lot. Here's the one thing I always hear people say, I'm sure you do. You can't do that here. I hear that a lot, Well, okay, well, that might be true, but why are all these cranes in the air and why are all these transactions happening all around you? And so I think a lot of times my experience has been, Kevin, real estate starts in the mind and it comes from learning. It comes from listening to guys like you, listening to other people on the internet and on YouTube and really taking a look at, what are creative people doing? I got a friend of mine that bought an old grocery store and converted it into self-storage, as an example. Wow. And the grocery store was sitting there for a couple of years. And then he sold it, and then he built an office building on the corner. He saw something that most people didn't see. We were doing condo conversions. So we were buying apartments and converting them into condos. We were selling 50 a month, back in the day in Oregon and Portland and in Scottsdale and Tucson and Las Vegas. And so, it's what do you see if, people drive by these vacant buildings all the time. Obviously a vacant building is going to be worth less than if it had somebody in it. So figure that out. How do you take something, and repurpose it? I got a zillion stories like this where, so I when people say they can't find something in their local area, I just said, you don't know what, is out there. And if you just really understood it and learned a little bit more and had a broader education, I think you would see more and more opportunities than, you see it. I see people buying, they look up and they go, oh, we could put 4 houses here and rip down 1, or we can go 2-story and create a rental on the top. And that's what's happening in California right now. In New York, my friends are buying air rights. They find these, they find these 20, 30-story buildings, and they buy the air rights above it for when they can go vertical. So it's education. It's literally seeing what nobody else sees. Well, Kevin, thank you. I really appreciate your time, and this has been great. And I think anytime we can collaborate like this to educate, even if we're wrong,
I love it. No, I think it's great.
You know what I mean? Everybody has their own opinions, and that's what I love about YouTube, because whatever we're saying today can change based on a government policy, as an example,
Yeah, and we'll just have to check in again, and then that's almost the way real estate is. It's just, hey, we work with what we've got today. We try to make the best decision, and if things change in 3 months, you do another podcast.
100%. That's what I love about it. So hopefully you guys are all watching and learning, and as like anything, these things do evolve as administrations and policies and everything come in to and change things immediately. Things can change very, very quickly. So. With that, Kevin, thanks again. I appreciate you following up and reaching out, and this has been really, really, really fun. I appreciate it.
It's been a blast. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Cheers.
Bye.